The streets of Nivara 7 were loud and bustling, filled with towering warriors in gleaming armor. Markets overflowed with strange fruits, sizzling meats, and weapons that glowed with blue energy. Alien children ran past vendors, playing rough games that would terrify a human parent. But amid the noise, one small voice trembled. "My mother won't wake up." A young Nivarian boy, Kale, no older than 7, pushed through the crowd. His wide golden eyes were filled with panic. He looked up at the warriors walking past him, their faces unreadable. No one stopped, no one helped. Kale grabbed the cloak of a passing merchant. "Please, she's not moving." The merchant barely glanced at him. "Do not shame your mother with weakness, boy. She is a warrior." Kale stumbled back, chest tightening. His mother was the strongest person he knew. But now she lay on the cold ground, silent. He didn't understand why no one cared. And then, "Hey kid, what's going on?" Kale turned and saw a human standing there. He was tall for his kind, with messy brown hair and sharp blue eyes. He didn't have armor, just a worn-out jacket and a look of concern. His name was Jack Carter, a diplomat, a fast talker, and, according to some, an idiot for staying on Nivara 7. Jack crouched down. What happened? Kale hesitated. He had been taught that humans were outsiders, weak, unworthy of their warriors. But right now, this human was the only one listening. My mother collapsed. She won't wake up." Kale's voice cracked. Jack didn't waste time. "Where is she?" Kale grabbed his sleeve and pulled him through the market, weaving between armored warriors and massive alien beasts. Jack followed without hesitation, his mind racing. They stopped in a shadowed alley. There, lying on the ground, was Commander Vena. Jack froze, his breath caught in his throat. He knew that woman. The fierce warrior who had once laughed at his jokes. The woman who had beaten 5 rivals in a duel the first time he saw her. The woman who had left him without a word. Jack swallowed hard, pushing the past aside. She was unconscious, her breathing slow but steady. Kale clutched Jack's sleeve. "Fix her." Jack ran a hand through his hair. Okay. Let's not panic." Cal's voice rose. "You're already panicking." "Only a little." Jack knelt beside Vena, checking her pulse. Strong. Too strong, actually. This wasn't sickness. This was something else. A shadow loomed over them. Jack looked up and saw a massive Nivarian warrior watching him with narrowed eyes. "You interfere in warrior customs, human," the alien said. His voice was deep, rumbling like thunder. "She is in the blood slumber." Jack blinked. The what now? The warrior crossed his arms, a state of deep rest after battle. "She will awaken only when her chosen champion proves his worth." Jack looked between Vena and the warrior. His stomach sank. "Oh no. I know exactly where this is going." The warrior smirked. "The trial has already begun." Jack turned to Kale. "Kid, please tell me I'm not her chosen champion." Kale gave him a hopeful look. "You kind of are." Jack groaned. "I knew I should have stayed on the ship." The warriors around them began to gather. Some looked amused, others intrigued. Jack knew one thing for sure. He was completely, absolutely doomed. Jack stood frozen as the crowd of Nivarian warriors circled around him. The air was thick with tension, and the way they watched him, half amused, half expectant, sent a nervous chill down his spine. "A trial? Me? Oh, this is just fantastic." He glanced down at Vena, still unconscious on the ground. Her breathing was steady, her expression calm. Too calm. Meanwhile, her son, Kale, looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "You can win, right?" the boy asked. Jack forced a smile. "Define win." A deep voice cut through the air. "The trial is simple, human." Jack turned and found himself staring at Commander Ralvik, a towering Nivarian with cold, piercing eyes. Jack had met him once before, Vena's second in command, and her fiercest rival. That guy hated him. Ralvik raised a hand, and the crowd silenced. "You claim the role of her chosen," he said, his tone almost mocking. "Then prove your worth. A warrior must fight for his bondmate." Jack's stomach dropped. Bondmate, he choked. Whoa, 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 slow down. Who said anything about bonding? I was just. Ralvik smirked. You came when no one else did. You fought against our ways for her sake. That is a warrior's claim. Jack opened his mouth, shut it again. His brain was screaming at him to run, but then he caught Cal's desperate expression. The kid had no one else. Jack let out a long sigh and rolled his shoulders. All right, fine. What's the challenge? A large circular ring had already been drawn in the dirt. Warriors stepped back, leaving an open space. Jack gulped. That's never a good sign. Ralvik gestured toward the opposite side of the ring. You will face a challenger, he announced. Jack took a deep breath, cracked his neck, and tried to mentally prepare himself. Maybe it would be someone his size. Maybe he could talk his way out of it. A shadow loomed over him. Jack turned his head and immediately regretted it. The challenger was twice his size. Heavy armor, sharp tusks, and a giant energy spear that crackled with power. The alien warrior looked like he could crush Jack with one hand. Jack exhaled sharply. No, I was really hoping for a paperwork challenge. Cale tugged at his sleeve. You can do it. Jack gave him a weak thumbs up. Love the optimism, kid. Ralvik raised his hand. Begin. Jack barely had time to react before the warrior charged. Instinct kicked in. He dodged to the side just as the spear slammed into the dirt where he had been standing. Dust flew into the air. Whoa, no warm-up? No introductions. Jack yelped. This is just rude. The warrior lunged again, swinging the spear in a wide arc. Jack ducked, barely missing the hit. He was fast, but his opponent was stronger, meaner, and way too enthusiastic about stabbing him. Jack needed a plan, fast. He dodged another strike and shouted, Hey, big guy, you ever play? He suddenly threw a handful of dirt into the warrior's face. The alien stumbled back, coughing. Jack grinned. Dirty? The crowd gasped. Warriors whispered among themselves. Ralvik narrowed his eyes. Clever, but dishonorable. Jack shrugged. Yeah, well, I prefer alive over honorable. The warrior recovered quickly and roared in fury. Jack had only made him angrier. Okay, new plan, Jack muttered. The warrior charged again, spear aimed straight for him. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't overpower him. He couldn't outlast him. But he could outthink him. Jack suddenly dropped to the ground and slid beneath the warrior's legs. As the alien stumbled in confusion, Jack sprang up behind him and yanked on a loose strap of his armor. With a loud snap, the chest plate fell off. The crowd gasped again. The warrior froze. His entire stance shifted from aggression to absolute humiliation. Jack blinked. Wait, what just happened? Cale whispered urgently. That was his honor strap. You just publicly shamed him. Jack's eyes widened. Oh, that's good. The warrior bowed his head in defeat. Ralvik studied Jack for a long moment. Then, with a grudging nod, he turned to the crowd. The human has won the trial. Jack barely caught himself from collapsing. He was covered in sweat, his heart racing. Cale cheered. The warriors murmured in shock. And then, a soft groan. Jack's breath caught. He spun around. Vena's fingers twitched. Her eyes fluttered open. And the first thing she saw was Jack, looking completely exhausted, covered in dirt, and grinning like an idiot. Welcome back, he said, still catching his breath. You owe me one. Vena blinked at him, then at the entire crowd surrounding them, then back at him, and she sighed. What did you do this time, human? Vena sat up slowly, her sharp eyes scanning the gathered warriors, the dust-covered arena, and finally Jack, who was still catching his breath. She sighed. You fought in my name, didn't you? Jack wiped his forehead. Technically, I fought to not die. Winning was just a bonus. A low murmur ran through the crowd. Nivarian warriors were not easily impressed, but Jack had done something unexpected. He had fought using his mind, not brute strength, and somehow he had won. Cale rushed forward and threw his arms around his mother. You're awake. Vena softened at her son's touch, but her gaze quickly sharpened when she looked back at Jack. "Explain, now." Jack scratched the back of his head. "Well, nobody was helping, so I may have, challenged your entire species' traditions, embarrassed a guy twice my size, and now everyone thinks I claimed you as my bondmate, which, to be clear, I didn't." Vena stared at him. Kel beamed. "He was amazing, Mother. He fought bravely." Jack held up a hand. "I mostly ran bravely." Before Vena could respond, Commander Ralvik stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "The human has completed the trial. By our laws, he has earned the right to stand beside you." Jack held up both hands. Wait, hold on. I did not agree to that part." Ralvik ignored him and turned to Vena. "You were unconscious during the trial, but now that you are awake, tradition states that you must acknowledge the warrior who fought in your name." Vena's gaze flicked toward Jack. "And if I don't?" Ralvik's mouth twitched. "Then it is an insult of the highest order." The crowd fell silent. Jack gulped. "I don't like where this is going." Vena sighed heavily. She pinched the bridge of her nose as if fighting off a headache. Then she looked at Jack with a mix of frustration, amusement, and something else he couldn't quite place. She stepped toward him, close enough that Jack could hear the faint hum of her breath. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" she murmured. Jack shrugged. "Not a clue. But I do know that I stopped your son from crying, got myself nearly killed, and humiliated a guy who probably wants to strangle me right now, so that's something." Vena studied him for a long moment. Then, to Jack's absolute horror, she reached forward and grasped his wrist. The crowd gasped. Warriors whispered among themselves. Jack stiffened. What just happened?" Kale grinned. "She acknowledged you." Jack blinked. "That's good, right?" Kale nodded eagerly. "Yes, it means she accepts your victory." Jack exhaled in relief. Then Ralvik smirked. "And it also means you are now bound by her warrior's debt." Jack's relief died instantly. "Her what now?" Ralvik folded his arms. "By our customs, a warrior who is saved by another is bound to repay their debt. It is not a simple favor. It is a bond of honor. Until the debt is settled, you are tied to her fate." Jack's stomach dropped. Vena gave him a pointed look. "Congratulations, human. You just made your life much more complicated." Jack ran a hand down his face. "Oh, fantastic. And how exactly does this debt get repaid?" Ralvik smiled, a little too smugly. "That is for Vena to decide." Jack turned to her warily. "You're not gonna make me fight more of your people, are you?" Vena smirked. "Not yet." Jack groaned. Kale tugged at his sleeve. "Does this mean you'll be staying with us, Jack?" Jack looked at the kid's hopeful eyes, then back at the crowd of giant, armed warriors who would probably love to see him fail. Jack sighed. "Looks like I don't have a choice, kid." Kale grinned. "Good. Mother needs someone like you." Jack laughed weakly. "You mean someone reckless enough to throw himself into a death match?" Kale nodded seriously. "Exactly." Jack stared at him, then at Vena, then at the entire crowd watching him, and he realized something very important. He was in way over his head. Jack sat on the edge of a stone platform, his hands gripping the cool surface as he tried to process what had just happened. The warrior's debt. He wasn't even sure what that truly meant, but judging by the way the Nevarians looked at him, it was a big deal. Vena stood a few feet away, speaking in low tones with Commander Ralvik. The other warriors still lingered, watching Jack like he was some sort of curious specimen. A few were clearly unimpressed, while others whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing in his direction. Kale, however, sat right next to Jack, swinging his legs back and forth. "You should be proud. My mother never lets anyone stand beside her like that." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, somehow, I don't think she's thrilled about it." Kale tilted his head. "Maybe not at first, but she will see your worth." Jack sighed. "Kid, I don't even know my own worth right now." Before Kale could respond, Vena approached. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. Jack could tell she was still evaluating him, as if deciding whether he was a mistake or not. come with me." Jack frowned. "Where?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned sharply and began walking toward a large structure built into the cliffs. It was made of dark metal and stone, giving it the look of a fortress. Jack glanced at Call, who simply smiled. "You should go. It's important." With a sigh, Jack pushed himself up and followed. The inside of the fortress was colder than he expected, dimly lit by glowing blue symbols etched into the walls. The halls were wide, designed for warriors much larger than him, and the air carried the faint scent of metal and earth. Vena led him into a chamber that looked like a war room. A large circular table sat in the center, covered in holographic projections and ancient-looking maps. Weapons were mounted on the walls, each one deadlier than the last. Jack whistled. "You guys really commit to the whole warrior thing, huh?" Vena ignored his comment. She turned and faced him, arms still crossed. "You won today, but do not be foolish enough to think you are strong." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Wow, thanks for the vote of confidence." She stepped closer, her gaze sharp. "You survived because you were clever. That is good. But here, cleverness is not enough. You carry a debt to me now, and until it is fulfilled, you are bound to this world. That means you must be capable of defending yourself." Jack blinked. "Wait, are you saying?" "I will train you," she said simply. "You must not be weak if you are to stand beside me." Jack stared at her. Hold on. I didn't sign up for." Vena took a step closer. "Would you rather leave yourself defenseless? You've embarrassed one of our warriors today. Do you think he will let that go?" Jack hesitated. "Well, no, but—" "Then you will learn." Jack sighed. "I feel like I don't have a choice." Vena smirked slightly. "Now you understand." Jack groaned. "Fine, but let's get one thing straight. I don't do crazy fight-to-the-death training, okay?" Vena's smirk grew. "We shall see." Jack wasn't sure if he liked that answer. Later that night, Jack found himself in a small chamber that had clearly been given to him as a resting space. The walls were made of smooth stone, and the mattress-like bed in the corner was firmer than he was used to. But it was quiet, and after the day he had, he needed the rest. A knock sounded at the entrance. Jack sat up. "Come in." To his surprise, it was Kel. The boy carried a small tray of food, setting it down in front of Jack. "I thought you might be hungry," Kel said with a grin. Jack smiled. "Thanks, kid." Kel hesitated. "Are you going to stay?" Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, Kel. Your mom's got me in some sort of life debt, and now she wants to train me. It's a lot." Kel nodded thoughtfully. "My mother is strong, but she is not unkind. If she chose to train you, it means she sees something in you." Jack scoffed. "Yeah, probably just an easy target." Kel laughed. "No, something else." Jack looked at the kid. "And what do you think she sees?" Kel smiled. "Someone who won't run away." Jack stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he grabbed a piece of food from the tray. "Guess we'll find out." Jack woke up to the sound of metal clashing and the distant roar of warriors in combat. It took him a second to remember where he was. Not on Earth, not in his tiny apartment, but on an alien planet surrounded by warriors who could probably crush him with one hand. Great. He groaned and sat up, rubbing his face. His back still ached from sleeping on the firm alien mattress, but before he could complain, a sharp knock came at his door. "Get up, human. Training begins now." Jack sighed. "Morning to you too, Vena." She didn't respond. He had a feeling that politeness wasn't a big thing around here. Jack splashed some cold water on his face and followed Vena through the fortress halls. The morning light outside was a deep golden hue, casting long shadows over the training grounds. Dozens of warriors were already fighting, their movements fast and brutal. Some wielded glowing energy blades, while others fought with bare hands, their strength enough to send opponents flying. Jack swallowed. "So, what's the plan?" "We start with stretches. Like jogging? Maybe some breathing exercises." Vena turned to him. "No." Before Jack could react, she moved. 1 second, she was standing in front of him. The next, she had him pinned to the ground, her knee pressing against his chest. "Lesson 1, she said. Never assume you are safe." Jack wheezed. "Good to know. Can't breathe." She pulled back, letting him roll onto his side. Jack coughed, glaring up at her. "Ever heard of a thing called warming up?" Vena ignored his complaints. "Get up." Jack groaned and pushed himself to his feet. "Okay, fine. What's next? You gonna throw me off a cliff?" Vena tilted her head. "Would that teach you faster?" Jack paled. That was a joke. Vena's expression didn't change. "Your body is weak, but your mind is not. You survived the first fight because you used your instincts. Today, we sharpen those instincts." Jack exhaled slowly. "Right, sharpening instincts. Sounds totally survivable." Vena gestured to a circular sparring ring where several warriors were practicing. Jack hesitated. "I'm not fighting one of them, am I?" Vena smirked. "No, you will fight me." Jack blinked. What?" Before he could argue, she stepped into the ring, motioning for him to follow. Warriors nearby paused their own training to watch. Some smirked, clearly expecting him to fail. Jack sighed and stepped inside. "Okay, let's set some rules." Vena lunged. Jack barely dodged in time, stumbling backward. She didn't slow down. Her next strike was faster, aimed for his ribs. Jack twisted, managing to avoid a direct hit, but her foot swept beneath him, sending him crashing onto his back. The watching warriors laughed. Jack groaned, staring up at the sky. "I hate this." Vena looked down at him. Again. Jack pushed himself up, trying to shake off the pain. He wasn't strong, but he was fast. If he couldn't overpower her, maybe he could outthink her. The moment she moved again, Jack threw himself to the side, avoiding her strike. She turned sharply, coming at him from another angle. Instead of dodging, Jack dropped low, rolling beneath her arm. A few warriors murmured in approval. Jack grinned. "Hey, that wasn't so bad." Vena's knee caught him in the stomach. Jack collapsed. The warriors laughed again. Vena crouched beside him. "Better, but not good enough." Jack groaned. "Define good enough." Vena smirked. "When you can land a hit on me." Jack wheezed. "So, never." She stood and offered him a hand. "If you truly think that, then you will always be weak." Jack hesitated. Then he took her hand. She pulled him up with surprising ease. For the first time since he arrived, Jack saw something different in Vena's expression. Not just judgment, but expectation. She wanted to see what he could become. Jack took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, again." Jack lay on the hard training ground, breathing heavily. His arms ached, his legs felt like jelly, and he was pretty sure he had a new bruise forming somewhere. Around him, the alien warriors continued their own sparring, barely paying him any attention. Vena stood over him, arms crossed. "You lasted longer this time." Jack groaned and sat up. "Lasted? I didn't even hit you once." Vena smirked. "You are learning. That is more important than winning." Jack rolled his eyes. "Easy for you to say. You're the one who keeps winning." Vena extended a hand. Jack hesitated before taking it. She pulled him up effortlessly, her grip firm and steady. "Come," she said. "Training is over for now." Jack didn't argue. His body needed a break before it completely gave up on him. As they walked back toward the fortress, Jack noticed something strange. The warriors, who had barely acknowledged him before, were watching him. Some gave small nods of approval. Others murmured to each other, their expressions not mocking, but curious. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Okay, either they're impressed, or they're taking bets on how long before I break a bone." Vena glanced at him. "They respect effort. Many outsiders would have given up by now." Jack scoffed. "Yeah, well, I'm too stubborn for that." Vena smirked, but didn't respond. They'd reached a small courtyard where a few warriors sat around a fire, cooking something that smelled surprisingly good. Jack's stomach growled. He hadn't realized how hungry he was. One of the warriors, a large alien with deep scars on his arms, gestured to Jack. "Sit, eat." Jack looked at Vena. "Is this a trick? Are they feeding me poison?" Vena rolled her eyes. It is food, human. Eat. Jack shrugged and sat down, accepting a plate. The food looked a little strange, some kind of roasted meat with a side of unfamiliar vegetables. But at this point, he was too hungry to care. He took a bite and blinked in surprise. This is actually good. The warriors chuckled. One of them, a woman with intricate tattoos on her arms, leaned forward. You fight like a fool, but you do not quit. That is something. Jack swallowed his bite. Thanks, I think. The woman smirked. You will learn, or die trying. Jack sighed. You people really love dramatic threats, huh? Vena sat beside him, taking her own plate. They are not threats. They are realities. Jack exhaled slowly. Right, realities. No pressure or anything. Despite the teasing, he felt a shift in the atmosphere. Before, these warriors saw him as nothing, just a weak outsider, barely worth noticing. But now they were paying attention. Jack glanced at Vena. She didn't say anything, but the small nod she gave him told him what he needed to know. He was earning his place. The meal continued with the warriors sharing stories, some about battles, some about the challenges they had overcome. Jack listened, fascinated by the way they spoke about strength, not just as power, but as something earned through struggle. Finally, as the fire burned low, Vena stood. We leave at sunrise. Jack blinked. Leave? Go where? She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Your real test begins tomorrow. Jack frowned. Wait, what kind of test? Vena didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away. Jack groaned and rubbed his face. Why do I feel like I'm going to regret this? The warriors chuckled. One of them clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him over. Rest well, human. You will need it. Jack sighed. That's what I'm afraid of. Jack woke before sunrise, the sky still dark above the alien fortress. A strange tension filled the air, a quiet sense of anticipation. He had no idea what was coming, but one thing was certain. This was going to be bad. Vena stood by the gates, her arms crossed. You are awake. Good. Jack rubbed his eyes. Not like I had a choice. My survival instincts wouldn't let me sleep. Vena smirked. Then you are learning. The other warriors gathered behind her, their expressions serious. Jack felt their silent judgment, watching to see if he would run. He sighed. All right, let's get this over with. What's the test? Vena gestured toward the dense jungle beyond the fortress. You must cross the fire path and return before nightfall. Jack frowned. Fire path? That sounds unnecessarily dangerous. A warrior with deep scars on his arms spoke. The fire path is a sacred trial. It tests not just strength, but mind and spirit. Jack exhaled slowly. Great. Love a good life or death challenge before breakfast. Vena stepped closer, lowering her voice. Listen carefully. There are beasts in the jungle. They hunt by movement and sound. If you panic, you die. Jack swallowed hard. Noted. Stay calm. Don't die. Anything else? She hesitated, then placed a small blade in his hand. If you must fight, strike the throat. It is their weakness. Jack looked at the blade. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The warrior stepped aside, clearing the way to the jungle. Vena met his eyes. Go. Jack took a deep breath and stepped forward. The jungle was alive. Strange glowing plants pulsed with light, casting eerie shadows. Thick vines curled like snakes around ancient trees. Somewhere in the distance, a low growl rumbled through the air. Jack forced himself to stay calm. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but Vena's words echoed in his head. If you panic, you die. He moved carefully, stepping over roots, keeping his breathing slow. Hours passed as he navigated the jungle, always listening, always watching. Then, movement. Jack froze. The bushes ahead rustled. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Jack gripped the knife. Easy, I'm not here to fight. The creature stepped forward. It was huge, its sleek body blending into the shadows, its claws sharp enough to cut through stone. Jack's heart pounded. He had to think. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Vena's sparring sessions. She never overpowered him with strength. She used his momentum against him. Jack looked at the vines above. A plan formed in his mind. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of metal, part of a broken communicator. He threw it to the side. The creature's head snapped toward the noise. In that instant, Jack grabbed a vine, swung upward, and landed on a thick branch just as the beast lunged. It slammed into the ground below, snarling in confusion. Jack didn't wait. He moved swiftly, leaping from branch to branch. The fire path wasn't just about survival. It was about thinking ahead. By the time Jack saw the fortress again, the sun was dipping below the horizon. The warriors stood by the gate, waiting. Jack stumbled forward, exhausted, bruised but alive. A warrior grunted. He returns. Another nodded, and not torn apart. Impressive. Jack swayed on his feet. Please, tell me there's food. Vena stepped forward, looking at him carefully. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. You passed. Jack let out a breath and dropped to the ground. Cool. Wake me up in a year. Jack sat on the stone steps of the fortress, his muscles aching from the brutal trial. He had survived the fire path, but the real challenge was just beginning. The warriors who once doubted him now watched with silent respect. Even the elders, who had dismissed him as weak, seemed less sure of their judgment. Vena stood before them, arms crossed. Her expression was unreadable. The trial is complete. Her voice carried authority, but there was something else in her tone, something personal. Now we decide. Jack sighed. Let me guess. There's another impossible test. A warrior smirked. No test, only a choice. Vena's gaze didn't leave Jack. You have proven yourself. You are not just an outsider anymore. You are one of us. Jack blinked. Wait, what? An elder stepped forward. You earned the right to stay, to take your place beside Vena. Jack felt the weight of their words settle over him. Stay. He looked around at the fortress, the towering walls, the warriors who had once seen him as nothing but a weak human. And then he looked at Vena. She had trained him, fought with him, argued with him. But more than that, she had believed in him. Jack exhaled sharply. And what if I say no? Vena's jaw tightened. Then you leave. You return to your world, and we will not follow. Jack hesitated. He had fought to prove himself, but he had never stopped to ask himself why. Did he belong here? His life on Earth felt so far away. The office job, the apartment, the meaningless daily routine. It had never made him feel alive like this place did. He had risked everything for this moment, but it wasn't the approval of the warriors that mattered. It was her. Jack looked at Vena. What do you want? He asked softly. For the first time, her expression wavered. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Vena, the warrior who always had an answer, was silent. Jack smiled. I think that tells me everything. He turned to the elders. I stay. A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some nodded in approval, others still looked doubtful, but it didn't matter. Vena's eyes locked onto his. Then you are bound to us. She stepped forward and, without warning, pressed her forehead against his. Jack stiffened in surprise, but the moment he saw the intensity in her eyes, he understood. This was their way. A bond. A promise. A warrior grinned. He doesn't look so weak now. Jack smirked. Damned right. I don't. Laughter echoed through the fortress. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars, and for the first time in his life, Jack knew exactly where he belonged.